So tonight I'm going to try to answer that question. What do we do with what we just learned? In other words, if what we do here on earth after salvation matters in the end, how does that affect us? So, because again, Hebrews 4 isn't about being saved. It's about, and it's not just about having peace here. It's about our future participation in the kingdom. So that's a big deal. So it deals with rulership, inheritance, kingdom life, and all those things. It's future, and it's going to be great, but it is something that we can fall short of. So the question then naturally is just, if there is a future judgment of works, if our faithfulness now affects our participation in the kingdom, then how are we supposed to live today without being overwhelmed with fear? How do we hold this diligence and assurance of salvation in one hand, how do we hold diligence and assurance in the same hand without dropping them, and strive for something without turning that striving into worry? We've got these are real questions. And we've got to deal with them, right? Because how do we live as believers today, every day of the week? Not just as Sundays. It's like we come to church, we do the church thing, but then Monday morning when you wake up and you go to work, how does this affect the way that we live when nobody's watching or whatever? So. And what I want us to see before we start is that everything. The problem is not the warning itself. The warning is good from Hebrews. The warning is actually given to us as a mercy. It's actually God's grace. All right. So, the problem then is not the warning. The problem then is what? I know you can't really answer that yet, but you know what? Okay, yeah, the doing, and so the way I wrote it is the posture that we bring, right? So I'll illustrate it like this. All right, there are two different types of running. Well, there are more types of running, but for this purpose, for illustrative purposes, I'm going to say there are two different types of running. You can run a race, and in a race, you've got a finish line, you've got a course, right? In the other type of running, you're running from something. All right, somebody's chasing you with a knife, and they want to hurt you. All right, how are those two different types of running different?
One is running with expectation.
Okay, so let's take them one at a time. So let's take, running the race. You started with that first. Running the race, you're running with expectation. And what'd you? Anticipation. Okay, good. And then what are you anticipating?
The win.
The win, the reward, right? Like the sense of, getting to the finish line and just saying, I've made it. I've done it. I may not have won the race, but I finished.
And sometimes there's donuts.
And what? And yes, and right. And then there's donuts at the end of the race, right? Which is always funny to me. At the end of this race, you're going to gorge on donuts and just counteract everything you just did. But I guess the point of a race isn't necessarily to get fit. It's the result of it. Anyway. Okay. So then what are some of the characteristics of running from somebody who's trying to chase you down, hunt you down to hurt you? Okay. Right. Okay, yeah. So you're running not for the anticipation of winning the race. You're running out of fear of what will happen if you don't stop running. Okay, what else?
One's for survival.
Yeah, right.
You got to.
Right.
Or else.
Right.
The
Well,
other is you want to.
right. Yeah, and when you're running from somebody, there's no end in sight. Like, you don't know when the end is going to be. I mean, you either outrun them or they're going to outrun you, and so you're either going to eventually finish at some point in time, or you're going to die, right? And so then what does that produce? So that produces anxiety, that produces like a paralyzing fear. But then eventually too, I mean, you don't know when it's going to end, so what are you going? Eventually you're just going to poop out. I mean, yeah, you're going to run out of steam, right? Because there is no end in sight. But now, what are the similarities between the two? They're both running, right? They're both covering, some distance. The race has a charted course. Now, running from somebody, you don't necessarily have a charted course, but and if you look from a distance, it'll look like both of those runners are doing the same thing, right? They're both running. They're both running fast. But and they might even be moving at the same speed, right? But they're going to have entirely different experiences while they're running those races. Think about the runner who's being chased doesn't enjoy the run. They're not going out for the enjoyment of running. They don't. So they're not. Running like the New York City Marathon, for example. I ran the New York City Marathon, and it was an incredible experience. Because you've got people cheering you on. I mean, you got bands. You got people who are giving out things like candy and bananas, and you got every 26.2 miles goes all through every 5 borough of New York. It covers 3 or so bridges, and goes through Central Park, ends in Central Park. Every single mile of it, with the exception of the bridges, is lined with people cheering you on. And it's just amazing. We lived in New York at the time, and I'm just looking around going, this is the greatest thing in the world, right? But if somebody's running after me with a knife, I'm not looking at the scenery. Right? I'm not looking around going, hey, look at that, like the band's playing for us, or hey, that sign's really, we're not enjoying you're not enjoying the race. Because like Brother Jim said, you're running for survival, right? You're running for your life. So what's my point in all that? One type of running is exhausting, and it doesn't really produce anything. It saves your life, I guess, but you don't get to, But one produces satisfaction. Like I said, you might not have won the race. I never won any race I ever ran. But I got to finish going, okay, I did it. I finished the race. Got to lay down for a little bit, and then eat a donut, right? And so the author of Hebrews is not writing to people being chased. So he's writing to people who have really been, like Brother Jim, to use his words, were invited into participation in a kingdom. And so there's a big difference in that. They're invited into rest, into an inheritance that God promised. And so the warning in Hebrews that we just read is not run the race or else be destroyed. Believers, the warning to believers, I should say, is not run the race or else you'll be destroyed. The warning is more similar to a coach who's on the sideline when the runner is, if the runner starts to slow down in the final stretch, like when you can see the finish line, you can't slow down. You got to run, keep running the race. So it's really more of a coach running, yelling to his runner, don't give up, don't stop, don't throw away what you've built, to use the language that we learned in the previous session. I can't remember exactly which verse you read, but talk about being built. Yeah, 1 Corinthians, yeah. Being built. So let's look at Hebrews 12, 1 through 2 very quickly. I know we'll get there eventually, but I just wanted to point this out because this comes just a few chapters after our text. let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. Notice the word, one of the words that he uses there, joy. Jesus didn't endure the cross because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't. Do you see what I mean by that? Jesus didn't endure the cross because he was afraid of, punishment or, it says, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. Now, we know that he, in the end, in the garden, he prayed, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, but if not, let thy will be done. So, but Jesus endured the cross because of the joy. What was the joy? What was the joy that he endured the cross for? What do y'all think?
Brothers and sisters.
He knew what the end of the race would look like.
Yeah.
Exactly, right, yeah,
Bringing the family, completing God's promise, making it
right,
all of this.
yeah. It's the joy of the finish, like of what he completed and what he's inviting them into, right? So, was Jesus' suffering real? Yeah, absolutely. Did it cost him something? It cost him everything, right? But he was running toward that finish that we were just talking about, not away from it. And he wasn't running away from the suffering. He wasn't running away from the cost. He was running through those things in order to get to what he was accomplishing. And Jesus isn't just an example of good behavior. He actually, it says that he is the founder or the author and the perfecter of our faith. All right, so he's the one who began it. He's the one who completes it. So if his way of thinking was joy-driven rather than fear-driven, and he's the one who's the author and the perfecter of our faith, then what does that mean our faith should look like? Joy-driven. Now, do we fear God? Yes, but like Brother Jim said at the very beginning, it's not a fear of condemnation, right? Because we know that for those who are in Christ Jesus, there is now therefore no condemnation. Right? So it produces joy. Okay, so let's say if we are to have a joy-driven, if we're to run the race out of joy and striving to, keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, why do so many of us live in anxiety and worry? Especially, let me clarify this too, like when it applies to the Christian life. And what I mean by that is worrying about, am I saved? Worrying, am I doing enough for God? If I did more, would God love me more? Or does God love me less because I'm not doing what God, that's what I mean. Why do so many of us live in fear if we're supposed to be living in joy? Okay, yeah, misunderstanding who God is because what?
We forget. If we don't
Yeah.
understand the word, we forget who he actually
And then when we forget who God is, what does it produce in us? Or what do we do? We forget who we are. What were you saying, Catherine?
I think we bring our own ideas to who God is.
Yeah.
Without him, that's not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jim, it looks like your wheels are turning back there.
I think what you're saying is something I've never thought about. I think it's very
Because you forget who Daddy is. Right.
I mean, he owns New York City, and I'm out here on the street.
Yeah.
You're still his son. He's still available. But once you forget who he is and what he has to offer you, your whole life can collapse in a lie.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our Father is not down in New York City.
Right. He's he's a lot bigger than that. Right.
Sometimes as Christians live homeless
Yeah.
on the street and forget what's available to us.
Yeah.
So we run out of fear. Where's our next meal?
Right.
From? Where's the next rent check coming from? Where's the next job?
Right.
From? Where? Instead of realizing.
Right. But the Gentiles eagerly seek those things. But I say, seek first what? The kingdom of God and His righteousness, and then all those things will be added to you. Right. So yeah, because where's my next meal going to come from? Where's my next rent paycheck or check going to come from? What does He say? Seek first. Seek me first. Seek to live in my righteousness, and then I'm going to take care of you. But yeah, because these things are available to us, but they're available to us through Him. And also, too, I think when we misunderstand who God is, and my point was, too, that causes us oftentimes to misunderstand who we are. And also, it causes us to misinterpret. A lot of people will say that I'm going to say this. This might sound a little weird, but I think you'll see what I'm saying. Is that like fear and anxiety in the Christian life is kind of a mark of seriousness. Like I'm not serious in my Christian walk unless I'm living in fear and anxiety. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you understand what? Do you agree, or do you see like what I mean by that? And so when we think that, what are we going to think about joy? It's a bad thing. It means that we're not taking it seriously, and it means that we're failing to live the Christian life.
Didn't the Puritans do that?
Yeah, right. The Puritans there were some great things that came out of the Puritan movement. They were prolific writers. I mean, they had some deep insights into just the Christian life and walk and everything. But at the same time, they lived in constant fear and anxiety. But then what does that produce? More fear and anxiety, and we never get to what God's called us to do. So I would say that a fear-driven, living the Christian life with fear-driven, being fear-driven, is actually a misunderstanding about the person who's actually who's running with us, who actually laid out the course for us, and that's Jesus. So, does the Bible teach us to live in fear? Well, when I'm talking about fear, I mean more of because I know what you're saying, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But does the Bible, especially does the New Testament teach us to live in a dread type of fear? Cast out fear, right? In fact, the Bible says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, present your request or make your request be made known to God. And then the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink. For the Gentiles eagerly seek those things. Yeah, right, exactly. So the Bible doesn't teach us to live in anxiety about and so again, anxiety, fear about our salvation. We should fear God, but we shouldn't fear our salvation.
The actual fear of God, like the way we're supposed to fear God, should drive out anxiety.
Well, exactly, right, right,
Who God truly is,
right,
and why He's to be feared, and that we're His children should drive
right.
that in.
And we'll get to that because I'm actually going to, Brother Jim touched on it at the very end with the example about Sadie. So we'll look at that and how that should give us a great assurance rather than leading us to just laziness or fear. But so let's look then at the command in Hebrews again, really quickly. Hebrews 4:11. Therefore, let us be diligent to enter that rest. All right. So again, it seems almost like a contradiction, doesn't it? Strive for rest. Why does that sound like a contradiction?
Because one sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. So you strive, we'd understand that word, right? To work. Work for rest? Like, that doesn't seem to make sense, right? Because work, it means, it says to work towards ceasing from work in the way we want to understand rest. Make effort toward the end of effort. So it sounds like a contradiction. But maybe it's just that we don't fully understand what rest means. Because our definition of rest isn't necessarily always the Bible's definition of rest. What we were just talking about. Because in the Old Testament, the Sabbath rest, what was it? I mean, think of how to ask this. What was it not about?
Sitting down and doing nothing.
Right. Now that's what they were supposed to do. Well, in order to do what?
Focus on God.
Pray. To focus on God. To pray. To read the Scripture. You're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath day. But okay. Again, living in New York City, it was fascinating. I used to run a lot. And there was a section of Brooklyn. They're called neighborhoods. It was called Borough Park. It was right next to kind of where our neighborhood was, and it was between our neighborhood and a huge park in Brooklyn called Prospect Park. And so I would run through Borough Park to get to the park, the actual park. Borough Park was just a neighborhood. It wasn't an actual park. So I'd go running through, and what was interesting, I would go running through sometimes on Friday evenings after the sun, was kind of going down. It wasn't quite as hot. I'd go running through on Friday evening, and I forget. Okay, Borough Park was predominantly Orthodox Jew, the Hasidic Jews. It was, these were like the ultra Orthodox. Like the men wore, their black top coats and black pants, and they had the curls and the top hats and the big bushy beards, and they all spoke Yiddish, just kind of a combination of German and Hebrew, and all the women, they just wore like foot dresses down to the ground basically, and all the kids were running around speaking Yiddish, and all the stores were, all the signs for the stores were all in Hebrew. And so I'd go running through on Friday night. And just before sundown, it was a madhouse of activity. I'd go run around through the park, and after the sun went down, I'd just start heading back home, and it was like ghost town. All right, so all that to say, why? What were they doing on Friday night? Preparing for the Sabbath, right? They were preparing for their rest. They were getting everything done because they couldn't go anywhere on the Sabbath. In fact, there was a hospital, I don't know if I've told y'all this before, there was a hospital in Borough Park called Maimonides Hospital, a very Jewish hospital, and it had a Shabbat elevator, a Sabbath elevator. You know what it did? It stopped on every floor on the way up and every floor on the way down. Why? Because they couldn't push a button. They couldn't push an elevator button on the Sabbath. That's like how seriously they take the Sabbath. Anyway, again, my point is, the rest for them was not just the absence of work. It wasn't just to sit down and kick back and rest. It was rest in order to worship, and it required work in order to prepare for the rest, right? So, and then also, and what was the Sabbath based on? It's based on, or a command from God, because and Jim talked about this as well. What did God do? He created the world and then rested on the seventh day. Was it because God was tired? No, God doesn't get tired, right? Was it because he needed to recover from all the work? No, it was because the work was finished. Everything was in place, so God rested, and he said that it was good. And so this is what rest really, in biblical sense, this is what rest is. It's the enjoyment of the completed design. It's participation in finished work. You see where I'm going with that? So Brother Jim pointed us to the millennium, Revelation 2:26, and to the authority that is promised to those who overcome. So the rest is then its participation in God's completed work, God's completed order. It's not just sitting in a hammock up in heaven, sipping on a lemonade. Hey, this is great, right? I get to do this for all of eternity. Just sit back and relax. If that's all heaven was, which is, let's be honest with ourselves, that's where a lot of people think about heaven. I just want my mansion down in the corner of glory, down by the fishing hole, and I'm going to spend all of the rest of my days in heaven, bass fishing, and and being with my family in my mansion, just kicking back. But if that's all heaven's about, what's the problem? It's what? Yeah, it makes it about us, and then so that makes it really futile, right? I mean, heaven's just futile. So, in other words, when he says strive to enter rest, it's not a contradiction. He's not saying, to work in order to not work. Yeah, think about like a musician. You watch, like Yo-Yo Ma playing the cello. It's just amazing, right? Makes it look so effortless. Like it's easy. And it makes me think, I could pick up a cello and play. Doesn't look very hard. But what do we not see? Thousands and thousands of hours practicing, putting in the work, going through the scales. Do you think, probably you never get past the basics. He's probably practicing scales every day. He's practicing. He works. And so when he gets up on that stage, kind of like what Josh was talking about, when they're in the fight, it's like 16 seconds. But what we don't see is all the preparation that went into it. And of course, we want to stay in the ring for more than 16 seconds, or 14 seconds even. But anyway, my point is that there's a lot of work that we don't see. So let's see. Kind of got off my notes here for a second. So when Yo-Yo Ma's sitting up there playing on the stage, and it looks like he's just playing with just absolute just beauty and freedom and everything, is practicing the opposite of that freedom that he's experiencing up on the stage. Now, I would say it's the path to that freedom, right? It's the way he's able to experience that up on stage because of all the preparation. So you can't have, you know, I'm not going to sit up on the stage and play the same way Yo-Yo Ma does. I've never even touched a cello. Actually, I guess I've touched one, but I've never played one. All right, so if our definition of rest is the absence of effort or responsibility, you know, it's just kicking back and relaxing, how does that distort the way that we read passages like this? You know, well, of course, you know, like I said, we're going to read rest and we're going to think, well, just the absolute absence of work. You know, we don't have to do anything now. We're just looking forward to that day of rest. So how is that going to change the way that we live here? Okay, so if that's not the definition of rest, we kind of established that, right?
Then we won't have a desire to work. There'll be we won't value the work.
Okay, right. If we take the kind of society's definition and our worldly definition of rest, then yeah, it's like, why work? We got rest to look forward to, so it's like, you know, just kind of make it through life.
To use your Yamaha illustration, you won't see the necessity
Yeah,
of the effort
right,
to enjoy the freedom
right.
of playing the finished work.
Yeah. Now, when he's up there playing, you think he's a little bit more satisfied with himself than I would be if I were playing the cello in front of thousands of people? Absolutely. Because I'd be frustrated. I wouldn't be able to enjoy that freedom. I wouldn't be able to enjoy that moment as much because I'd be frustrated. Right? So, yeah, but he's able to enjoy it. But it's because he's put in the work. So, in other words, like to drive that point home, then how does that change? What does that mean for us? How's it change the way that we live here?
We should see the value of the work, the necessity of the work, and actually the enjoyment
Of work. Yeah. Going back to the Garden of Eden example, did Adam and Eve, were they just put in the garden and said, hey, set up a hammock, sit back, relax, enjoy the fruit of the land, like, just don't eat from the, you know, from that tree? And what did God say? He said to tend the garden, to work the garden. I mean, you know, to guard it, which involved work. So even in the Garden of Eden, it wasn't just like a, you know, what we would imagine, you know, when we think of rest, you know, that it was rest, but it was in the context of work, but within a relationship with God. They walked with God in the garden. Yeah, because if we think that rest just means stopping, it's going to affect the way that we approach our faithfulness here on earth. Because, like Michelle said, if we just see it as the ceasing of working, then it doesn't motivate us to do anything here. Right? We could do that now. It's like, and like I said, it's just kind of like, it's almost like it causes us as Christians then to want to just set cruise control and just make it through this world in order to get to heaven. Exactly, right. And what's the saying? This just came to mind. So heavenly minded to be of any earthly use. Is that Is that the saying? Is that how it goes? Yeah, have y'all heard that? Something like that. I think I might have said it before. It's just a saying. It's just like but like so heavenly minded that we're of no earthly value or good, right? What does it mean? It's like we're so looking forward to heaven, we forget that we've got a job to do now, here. All right, so just another illustration. Again, just going back to the competition and athletes. You know, a swimmer, like a professional competitive swimmer, they'll train. I remember reading the story of Michael Phelps, and just of all the things that how many gold medals did he win in the Olympics? More than like anybody in history, right? I mean, again, he just glides through the water, makes it look so easy. But I remember reading about his daily regimen. I mean, of all the calories that he had to eat, but he couldn't just eat any calories. I mean, he'd eat like 10,000 calories a day. But it wasn't like, little Debbie snacks and, Twinkies. He had to eat clean, 10,000 clean calories a day. I mean, that's hard. That's hard to do. Because, chicken breast doesn't have that many calories. I mean, as many calories as, a bag of Doritos, which are just like junk calories, right? So he had to eat clean calories. He had to eat like 10,000 calories a day. And, I mean, he was practicing 7 days a week for 6 hours or more a day. And he would be in the water before the sun went up, and he'd be in the water, he'd be getting out of the water when the sun was going down. So he would study the technique, track his splits, all his history and all that stuff. Had to sleep, say no to other things in order to be able to do those things. He worked harder than anybody else. But if you, in one of the interviews, that they asked him, like, were you ever nervous during your races? And his answer, it's kind of surprising. He's like, no, not really. Because he was so focused, he was so intentional, he was so disciplined, and he trusted in his training, he trusted his coach, and he trusted the process. And now compare that to a student who, like I often did in high school, just crammed right before the day of a big test. Just, waited till the last minute, realized, I've got a test tomorrow. I'm going to try to cram as much information into my head as I possibly can, and then try to go take this test the next day. What do you think? Difference in outcome? Oh, yeah, right. Michael Phelps not worried because he had trusted the process. He knew that he had put in the work. Somebody who just crams before the test, completely different experience.
Problem is with that, like you compare that to the Christian walk and the work we're supposed to be doing. We don't know when the test is.
Yeah, right, yeah,
So
right.
I'm going to cram. I'm going to get a lot of stuff done for the Lord right before.
Right before, I mean, I could die on the way home today. Jesus could come back. I mean, who knows, right? So yeah, that's a good point. And so Hebrews 4 calls us to be like the swimmer, like Michael Phelps, right? Not like me cramming before a test back in high school. When it says be diligent, all right. So work, we got to strive. But what does it come from? It comes from a place of trust. And not in ourselves, but in whom? God. And what He's done. It's kind of what Hebrews is describing here. We have to put in the work. We do the work. We're diligent, as he says. But then who provides? God. God provides. And what does He provide? He provides His Word to us now that corrects us, it exposes, it teaches. We don't have to figure things out on our own. God's not called us to live the Christian life on our own. Thank God. He didn't just say, here's who I am. Now, good luck figuring out how to get to me. He gives us His Word. He came to dwell with. He in the tabernacle, He came to dwell with His people. In the New Testament, Jesus took on human flesh and came to dwell among us. And the word literally means to tabernacle among us. So God, we're not figuring this out alone. And so what do we have to do? We just have to stay the course. We keep striving toward the goal, keeping our eyes on Jesus. So, then what does godly fear actually look like then? Because the author of Hebrews does use the language of fear. Back in verse 1, says, "Let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it." All right, so we can't just kind of like whittle fear down to nothing and just make it so, like make the salsa so mild that, it has no taste, or loses its taste, I guess I should say. We have to understand the seriousness of who God is and the weight of His glory. But there's a difference between fear that warns us and a fear that paralyzes us. And I think those are two words that will be helpful for us when we think about fear, because one type of fear paralyzes and the other warns. So what's the difference? Well, fear that paralyzes us, you don't want to do anything. You don't do anything out of fear. The shrewd manager comes to mind. When the manager came and gave each of his servants different amount of talents, and and all of them in the end used those talents in order to produce more talents. But what happened to the guy with one? He buried it, put it away, and when the master came back, what did he tell him? He said, the master told him, what did you do with what I gave you?
I knew you were hard and severe man, so I hid it.
Yep.
So I could give back what you gave me with nothing added to it.
Yep.
And the master said, you knew I was a hard man.
Yep.
I demanded my own with interest, and yet you did nothing.
Right. So, what was the question? I just had a question in my head I was going to ask, but okay. What type of fear did that man have of his manager? It was a paralyzing fear. What type of fear? The other guys knew what type of manager he was, right? The other guys who had got the talents, the other servants. But what did that fear do? It motivated them to produce more, right? Now, is that parable about salvation? A lot of people think it is. They'll say, well, that guy lost his salvation. Or they'll say, in order to, avoid the theological gymnastics that they have to do to make it about salvation, they'll say he was never saved to begin with. But what is that parable talking about then, if it's not talking about salvation? It's our participation in the kingdom. What did you do while I was gone? Is Jesus here with us now? No. Is He coming back? Yes. Okay, so He's the manager. All right. And He's saying to us, what did you do with what I gave you? And if we have a paralyzing fear, then when Jesus comes back, we're going to say, well, I hid it. I hid my talents. I hid what you gave me to manage. All right, so should we have a paralyzing fear? No, moral of the story. Big wasp or something. Or just a dirt dauber. That's my ADHD. Anyway, so we're running out of time. Gosh, but okay, let's move on. So because I did want to cover. Let's see. Gosh, I've got so much to cover. I did want to talk. Okay, assurance. Because if we get assurance wrong, that's going to actually have consequences that will affect us. And here's what I mean by that. Because there's a kind of a thought in Christianity, and it's not always necessarily explicitly stated. Right? Somebody might not come out and necessarily say this, but it's definitely present. And it says that basically the assumption is that assurance is dangerous. Assurance is dangerous. That if you become too confident in your standing before God, that you'll stop trying. All right, so this goes back to this is what I was talking about with the example of Sadie that Brother Jim brought up at the very end of his session. And so what they're saying is that we need to have that paralyzing fear, or at least a little bit of it, because it motivates us. If Sadie, and he posed the question, if Sadie did something, if Sadie knows that you can't disown her, that no matter what, she is still y'all's child. I mean, y'all can force her out, y'all can, write her out of the will, whatever, but she's still your child. Is that going to cause her to want to give up, or should that motivate her to greater obedience? Should it motivate her to a greater love and appreciation for y'all as parents? Well, it should motivate her, right? It should. And so what I want to make sure that we understand that belief that assurance is demotivating is wrong. Because and it's actually harmful. Because the New Testament paints a very different picture of our assurance and motivation. Paul in Romans 12:1 says, I'll just read it to you, you don't have to turn there, but I appeal to you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So, the foundation for what he's saying right there is not because you don't know what will happen if you don't. What's the foundation? It's the mercy of God. We've been given everything, and so then that we respond from what He's given us. We respond from the overflow of what He's done for us. And what I've noticed, what I've seen actually, is the person who is genuinely secure in their standing before God, who knows that they're loved, knows that they're accepted, knows that that they are being preserved until the end. Not that we have to persevere, but that they're being preserved. It's that person who's free to live generously, to sacrifice greatly for the kingdom. In other words, to go back to the managers or to the servants, they understood, their they're standing before their manager. You see what I'm saying? They understood, they had assurance that even though he was a hard man, or whatever, they were willing to to go to great risks. They were willing to count the cost. Do you see what I'm saying? That assurance drove them to faithfulness. It was the lack of assurance in that one servant that drove him to do nothing. So in other words, I just want us to understand that we can have assurance, and assurance is not the opposite of faith. And so we should know that we are that nothing can take us out of God's hand, and so therefore that should motivate us to want to live without fear, to live with joy, but then also to work, to do the work of the kingdom, because we'll be rewarded in the end. We're going to face judgment. Every single one of us is going to face judgment. For those of us who are in Christ, the judgment's not for salvation, but what is it? For rewards, right? So then we should live our lives in such a way that when we get to the end, he'll say, well done, good and faithful servant. All right? So that changes the way that we live. And so it's not just a kind of coast through life in order to get to a rest, which is just the complete absence of work. It's we work to get to the rest. And then even in the rest is not necessarily just a complete absence of work. We get to go, we're worshiping God for all of eternity, and we're in his presence. So I hope that helps. And I'm going to go ahead and